A supermarket cashier offers a cup of coffee to a stranger in tears, one simple gesture, and something in her shifts. Who is this man carrying such a heavy silence? When the past shows up at the checkout, would you pay with courage or hand back destiny's change? Before we begin this beautiful story, subscribe to our channel to get heartwarming stories every day. The parking lot was quiet at 6:15 in the morning before the trucks arrived and the asphalt started collecting heat. Patricia Morales walked across it with her head down, the way she always did, counting steps between the white lines to keep her mind from wandering into worry. She carried a canvas bag over one shoulder, inside a black notebook and 3 pens in case one ran out mid-shift. 15 minutes early was her rule, not to impress anyone, but to give herself time to breathe before the register claimed her hands for 8 hours. The sky was still dark at the edges, fading from purple to gray. Streetlights hummed overhead, casting orange pools across the pavement. Patricia could hear traffic building on Montana Avenue, the city waking up in stages, delivery trucks first, then construction crews, then everyone else. Her sneakers made soft sounds against the concrete, a rhythm she knew by heart. She'd worked at Save Mart for 4 years, long enough to know which delivery trucks ran late, which items disappeared from shelves faster than the system showed, and which managers treated inventory like numbers instead of people's paychecks. Her mother used to say that care was a kind of attention, and Patricia had learned to pay it quietly. She checked the previous night's receipts, not because it was her job, but because someone had to notice the patterns before they became problems. Someone had to remember that every missing case of milk meant a family going without breakfast, and every inflated price meant a choice between food and rent. That Monday, the air smelled like diesel and dust. El Paso in October meant cool mornings that lied about the afternoon heat to come. Patricia was almost at the entrance when she saw the dark sedan parked near the far corner, engine off, windows up. She noticed the man inside because his shoulders were shaking, not from cold, from something heavier. She stopped walking. Her first thought was danger, a man alone in a parked car at dawn, in a neighborhood where poverty and resilience live side by side. Her second thought was her mother's voice. When you see someone drowning, you don't ask if they deserve the rope. Patricia looked at the security guard near the entrance, caught his eye, and gestured for him to follow at a distance. The guard, Miguel, who'd worked there longer than she had, nodded and moved toward her with his hand near his radio. She walked to the break room, poured coffee into a white foam cup, black no sugar, because that's how her father used to drink it when he was tired, and carried it back outside. The guard stayed 20 feet behind her, close enough to help, far enough not to crowd. Her hands were steady even though her heart was beating faster. Patricia knocked on the window, softly. The man didn't move at first, and she could see his face now, eyes red, jaw tight, skin pulled over exhaustion. She knocked again. He looked up, startled, then rolled the window down halfway. The smell of leather seats and cologne reached her, expensive and out of place. "I'm sorry to bother you," Patricia said, keeping her voice steady, "but I thought you might need this." She held out the coffee. Sometimes a pause helps before the day starts. The man stared at the cup like he'd forgotten what kindness looked like. Then he took it with both hands, his fingers trembling slightly. He didn't say thank you, but his eyes did. Patricia nodded and turned back toward the store, leaving him there with the coffee and whatever was breaking him apart in private. She didn't know his name. She didn't know that in 5 minutes she would clock in and start her shift like every other Monday. And she didn't know that the man in the car, Emiliano Rivas, heir to the largest grocery chain in the state, would remember this moment longer than any contract he'd ever signed. Emiliano sat in the car, with the coffee warming his palms, and tried to remember how to breathe without it hurting. The week before, he'd found the contracts. They were hidden in plain sight, buried in a folder marked Q3 Supplier Review, written in language so technical it almost looked legitimate. Almost. He'd been working late in his downtown office when he found them. The Franklin Mountains had been dark shapes against the sunset, and the building was empty except for the cleaning crew. He'd been looking for quarterly reports when his hand landed on the wrong folder, or the right one, depending on how you measured luck. The new supplier was a shell company. He'd traced it back through 3 layers of paperwork before finding his fiancée's sister's name on the registration. The prices were 12% above market average, the delivery schedules designed to create chaos, and the invoices signed off by managers who reported directly to Ramiro, his business partner, the man who'd stood beside him at his father's funeral and promised to protect the company they'd built together. It wasn't just theft, it was surgery, precise cuts designed to make certain stores look unprofitable, reports highlighting unsustainable losses in neighborhoods where people had no voice to push back, a manufactured crisis that would justify selling off non-performing assets to a fund Ramiro controlled. The math was elegant. The betrayal was complete. His father had started Save Mart 30 years ago with a single store on the east side. He'd believed in simple things: fair prices, steady work, respect for the people who kept the lights on. Emiliano had inherited the business along with those principles, and now someone was using his inheritance to destroy everything his father had built. The thought made his chest ache like something was cracking inside. Emiliano had confronted Ramiro in the office 2 days ago. His partner had smiled, calm, practiced, empty. "You're too close to this, Emiliano. You need to step back. Let the numbers speak." As if numbers could speak without someone deciding which ones to silence. When he'd tried to talk to his fiancée, she'd met him at the door of her apartment with her arms crossed and her voice cold. "Sign the restructuring agreement, or we'll make sure everyone knows you've been mismanaging your father's legacy. Your choice." So here he was, parked outside one of his own stores, crying like a man who'd lost his compass. And then a woman he'd never met had walked over with coffee and reminded him that the world still contained people who cared without conditions. He drank the coffee slowly. It was bitter and lukewarm, and the best thing he'd tasted in days. When he finally drove home, he left the empty cup on the passenger seat like evidence of something he didn't want to forget. Patricia clocked in at 6:30 and went straight to the register. The store smelled like floor wax and cardboard, familiar and grounding. She tied her apron, opened her drawer, and started counting bills. Morning light filtered through the front windows, turning dust motes into small, drifting constellations. Her younger brother, Daniel, was 17 and halfway through his senior year at El Paso High. Smart kid, scholarship potential if he could focus on calculus instead of worrying about whether they'd make rent. Their mother had died 3 years ago, lung cancer, that spread faster than prayers could slow it, and Patricia had been carrying the weight ever since. She didn't mind. It was just math. Work enough hours, budget carefully, say no to things she wanted, so Daniel could say yes to things he needed. The notebook in her bag was full of patterns. She'd started keeping it 6 months ago when she noticed discrepancies in the dairy section. Whole milk marked as damaged on Saturdays, but the cartons looked fine to her. She checked the back room and found cases with broken seals that didn't match the breakage reports. Somebody was inflating the numbers, and she didn't know why, but she knew it wasn't right. Her mother had taught her that much. When something feels wrong, you don't ignore it just because speaking up is inconvenient. At 7, her manager called her into the back office. Alvaro was a compact man with a thin mustache and the kind of authority that felt borrowed. He sat behind his desk like a judge about to deliver a verdict. The office was small and windowless, smelling of old coffee and printer toner. A photo on his desk showed him shaking hands with someone in a suit, probably at some corporate event where everyone pretended to care about excellence. "Patricia," he said, folding his hands, "we need to talk about this morning." She felt her stomach drop. "This morning?" "The man in the parking lot. You approached him, alone, off the clock." He leaned forward. "That's not your job. It's reckless. It makes us look unprofessional." Patricia opened her mouth to explain. She'd asked the guard to follow. She'd only offered coffee. She'd been trying to help. But Alvaro raised a hand. I don't want excuses. I want you to understand that there are protocols. Important people are visiting this week, and we can't have employees acting on their own judgment. He slid a form across the desk. 1 day, suspension. Unpaid. Effective immediately. Patricia stared at the paper. Her name was already filled in. 1 day? For giving someone coffee? For stepping outside your role, Alvaro said. His voice was final. Go home. Come back Wednesday. She left the office with her hands shaking, not from anger, but from the arithmetic already running in her head. 1 day without pay meant 30 hours lost. 30 hours meant $240 she couldn't afford to lose. That was groceries for 2 weeks. That was gas money to get Daniel to his debate tournament in Las Cruces. That was the difference between managing and drowning. Emiliano came back to the store that afternoon. He wore jeans, a plain jacket, and a baseball cap pulled low. No security, no entourage, just a man walking the aisles like any other customer, except he wasn't shopping. He was watching. He started in produce, where the lettuce was browning at the edges and half the bins sat empty. A stocker was rearranging oranges to fill the gaps, making 2 crates look like 4. The kid couldn't have been more than 19, wearing a Save Mart vest that was too big for his shoulders. Emiliano approached slowly, keeping his voice casual. Hey, can I ask you something? I've been coming here for a while, and it seems like produce is always running low. What's going on? The kid glanced around nervously. System says we got enough, he said, shrugging, but it never matches what's actually here. Manager says it's breakage. How much breakage? The kid glanced around again, lowered his voice. Enough that it don't make sense. Like, we'll get a delivery Friday afternoon, and by Sunday half of it's marked damaged. But I seen those cases. They're fine. Somebody just... I don't know. I just stuck. I don't ask questions. Emiliano thanked him and moved on. He walked through frozen foods where the ice cream freezers were half empty and the frost on the glass was thick enough to block the view. Canned goods had gaps that looked deliberate, whole sections missing, as if someone had pulled stock on purpose. Cleaning supplies sat in disarray, bottles tipped over, labels facing the wrong direction, small things that added up. In the back room, he found damaged cases stacked near the loading dock, milk with broken seals, cereal boxes with dents, detergent bottles supposedly leaking, but completely intact. He took photos with his phone, quiet and quick, angling the shots to show the lot numbers and the damaged stickers that didn't match the actual condition. That's when he saw the notebook. It was sitting on a break room table, left behind like someone had decided it didn't matter anymore. Black cover, spiral bound, filled with neat handwriting. He flipped through the pages and found dates, times, product codes, and notes written in careful detail. Saturday, 10/7. 6 cases, whole milk marked damaged, seals intact. Truck, 347 late by 2 hours. The entries went back months. He read it like a map, each page revealing routes someone had traced through the chaos. This wasn't random observation. This was evidence collected by someone who understood that small thefts, repeated often enough, became policy. Emiliano closed the notebook and carried it to the front. He asked the cashier who'd been working Saturday mornings in dairy. Patricia Morales, the woman said, but she's not here. Got suspended this morning. Suspended? For what? The cashier hesitated, glancing toward the office. Something about the parking lot. I don't know the details, but it wasn't fair, whatever it was. Emiliano felt something cold settle in his chest. The woman who'd given him coffee, who'd seen him breaking and offered grace without asking why, had been punished for it. And the notebook she'd left behind was proof that someone didn't want her paying attention. Patricia spent the afternoon at home, sitting at the kitchen table with her own notebook open in front of her. She'd made a copy of everything before leaving it at work. Not because she expected anyone to read it, but because writing things down was how she made sense of the world. The apartment, was quiet. Daniel was at school, probably in AP chemistry or sitting in the library pretending to study while actually worrying about her. Their place was small, 2 bedrooms, thin walls, a kitchen barely wide enough for one person, but it was theirs. She'd kept it that way since their mother died, working extra shifts, saying no to nights out, making sure the rent came first and everything else came after. The numbers didn't lie. Over 6 months, the El Paso store had reported breakage rates 30% higher than any other location in the chain. The spikes always came on weekends, always involved the same truck, and always happened during shifts when Alvaro was on duty. She'd cross-referenced the damaged goods with the supplier invoices, easy to find if you knew where to look, and found that the new vendor charged more and delivered less. She wasn't an accountant, she wasn't a detective, she was just someone who paid attention because nobody else seemed to be. Her mother had worked as a housekeeper for 20 years, cleaning homes for families who never learned her name. She used to come home exhausted, hands raw from chemicals, and still find energy to help Patricia with homework. "You're smart," she'd say. "Use it. Don't let people make you small." Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Patricia Morales?" The voice was male, formal, careful. "Yes?" "My name is Emiliano Rivas. I'm the owner of Save Mart. I found your notebook. I'd like to talk to you tomorrow morning if you're willing. It's important." Patricia's breath caught. The man from the parking lot. You own the store?" "I do. And I think you've been noticing things that need to be noticed. Can you come in at 8? I'll make sure it's worth your time." She should have been angry. She should have demanded to know why she'd been suspended for trying to help. But something in his voice, steady, honest, tired, made her say yes. He sounded like someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to trust people and was trying to remember. Patricia arrived at the store at 7:50 the next morning. The parking lot was filling with early shoppers, and the air smelled like exhaust and fresh bread from the bakery section. She found Emiliano waiting in the conference room with 2 other people she didn't recognize, a woman in a gray suit and a man with a laptop. The conference room was small and utilitarian. White walls, fluorescent lights, a long table with chairs that didn't match. Someone had made coffee, and the smell of it filled the space with something that felt almost like comfort. Patricia could see her reflection in the window that looked out onto the sales floor, and she looked small and out of place. Emiliano stood when she entered. He looked different from the man in the parking lot, cleaner, more composed, but with the same exhaustion around his eyes. "Patricia, thank you for coming. This is Elena Cortez, our general counsel, and Marcus Wu, purchasing analyst from our Houston office. Please sit." Patricia sat. Her hands were clenched in her lap, and she could feel her pulse in her throat. Elena poured her a cup of coffee without asking, sliding it across the table with a gentle nod. The small gesture loosened something in Patricia's chest. Emiliano pushed the black notebook across the table. "You wrote this?" It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Why?" She looked at him, trying to read what he wanted to hear, but his eyes were direct and patient, so she told the truth. "Because I kept seeing things that didn't match, and when things don't match, people get hurt. Either we lose money and cut jobs, or we keep hiring people who steal. Either way, it's wrong." Elena leaned forward, her pen poised over a legal pad. "Did anyone ask you to document these discrepancies?" "No." "Did Alvaro know you were keeping records?" Patricia shook her head. "I didn't tell anyone. I wanted to understand. My mom used to say that if you don't understand how something breaks, you can't fix it. So I wrote things down." Emiliano opened the notebook to a page marked with a sticky note. "October 7th, you recorded 6 cases of milk marked as damaged. Truck 347 late by 2 hours. You noted the seals were intact." He looked up. "How did you know to check?" "Because it kept happening. Same truck, same delay, same results. I started watching, and when I looked at the cases, they were fine. Someone just wanted them marked as broken." Marcus typed something on his laptop, the keys clicking softly. That truck delivers for Mesa Supplies, the vendor added 6 months ago. Same vendor that charges 12% above market rate and has payment terms that favor the middleman. Emiliano's jaw tightened. Mesa Supplies is owned by a shell company, and that company is tied to my former fiancé's family. The room went quiet. Patricia felt like she'd walked into the middle of a story she didn't understand, but had somehow been part of all along. Alvaro suspended you for helping me in the parking lot, Emiliano said. I think that was an excuse. I think he saw you as a threat. A threat? You pay attention. And right now, people are counting on nobody paying attention. For the next 3 days, Patricia worked in secret. Officially, she was still suspended, but in reality, she arrived at the store at 5 in the morning before anyone else and spent hours in the back room with Marcus. They photographed damaged inventory, compared lot numbers with delivery schedules, and traced the flow of goods from truck to shelf to breakage report. The work was methodical and exhausting. They wore gloves to avoid contaminating evidence, used sticky notes to mark each case they documented, and took multiple photos from different angles. Marcus brought a portable scanner and copied every invoice they could find. Patricia showed him where Alvaro kept his files, locked in a cabinet, but the key was taped under his desk drawer. Amateur hour. The pattern was surgical. Mesa Supplies delivered on Fridays, always late. The delays forced weekend stockers to rush, which created confusion. During that confusion, someone, usually a supervisor placed by Alvaro, would mark intact goods as damaged. The breakage reports justified emergency orders at inflated prices, and the cycle continued. Patricia found names she recognized in the records. Luis from receiving, who'd always seemed nervous around Alvaro. Carmen from night shift, who'd quit suddenly last month. Tony, the weekend supervisor, who drove a truck that didn't match his salary. They'd all been part of it, willingly or not. Some of them might not know, Patricia said one morning, staring at a delivery receipt signed by Luis. They might just be following orders. Marcus looked up from his laptop. Maybe, but at some point people have to ask questions, especially when the orders don't make sense. Emiliano visited 2 other stores with similar histories. Same vendor, same delays, same supervisors. The losses added up to hundreds of thousands of dollars, but the real goal wasn't theft. It was sabotage. Make the stores look unprofitable, pressure the board to sell, and buy them back through a fund controlled by Ramiro and the people around him. In Midland, Emiliano found a store manager who'd been threatened when she questioned the deliveries. In Odessa, he found forged signatures on contracts that nobody remembered signing. The network was bigger than he'd imagined, and it ran deeper. Patricia found the proof Emiliano needed. It was hidden in a filing cabinet in Alvaro's office. Copies of invoices with timestamps that showed Mesa Supplies contracts were always signed on Fridays, when the legal department worked with a skeleton crew. Nobody had been watching. Nobody except her. The meeting happened on a Wednesday afternoon. Emiliano called all the El Paso staff into the break room, cashiers, stockers, cleaners, everyone. He didn't announce the agenda beforehand. He just said it was mandatory. The break room was crowded and warm. People stood shoulder to shoulder, some leaning against walls, others sitting on tables because there weren't enough chairs. The air smelled like instant coffee and the industrial cleaner they used on the floors. Patricia stood in the back, trying to make herself small. She'd spent the week gathering evidence, but now that the moment had arrived, she felt like she was holding a match near something that might explode. Emiliano stood at the front of the room, no podium, no script. He'd rolled up his sleeves and his tie was loose, like he'd already been working all day. "I'm here because this store almost got closed down," he said. His voice was calm, but there was weight in it. Not because it was failing, because people wanted it to look like it was failing. And I need you to understand how that happened. People shifted uncomfortably. Some crossed their arms. Others looked at the floor. Everyone knew something had been wrong, but nobody had wanted to name it. He explained the scheme in plain language. Overpriced suppliers, manufactured losses, false breakage reports, managers who benefited from chaos. He didn't name names yet, but everyone knew who he was talking about. You could see it in the way people glanced toward where Alvaro stood near the side door, arms crossed, face unreadable. Then he nodded at Patricia. Some of you know Patricia Morales. She's been working here for 4 years, and for the last 6 months, she's been keeping records. Not because anyone asked her to, because she noticed things that didn't make sense, and because she cared enough to write them down. Patricia felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Her face burned. She wanted to disappear. But Emiliano kept talking. This is what paying attention looks like. He held up the black notebook. And it's the reason we're going to fix what's broken here instead of shutting the doors. Alvaro, standing near the side door, tried to speak. This is all... There's no proof. There's proof, Emiliano said, quietly. He nodded at Marcus, who pulled up documents on a laptop connected to a projector. Invoices, delivery schedules, signatures, everything laid out in neat columns that told a story no one could deny. Alvaro Martinez, you're terminated, effective immediately, for breach of fiduciary duty and participation in a scheme to defraud this company. Alvaro's face went white. He started to argue, but Elena stepped forward and handed him a folder. Your severance is voided. If you want to dispute that, we'll see you in court. The room stayed silent, not because people were shocked, but because they'd been carrying suspicion for months and finally had permission to name it. When Alvaro left, the tension broke like a held breath released. The audit took 3 weeks. An independent firm went through every store in the chain, checking contracts, delivery records, and breakage reports. They found the pattern everywhere. Ramiro had placed managers willing to manipulate numbers. The shell supplier had overcharged for months, and the falsified reports had justified a restructuring plan that would have handed control to a fund Ramiro and the fiancé's family controlled. The auditors worked out of a conference room in the corporate office, surrounded by boxes of files and laptops running analysis software. Patricia visited once, brought in to explain her methodology. She felt out of place among the accountants and lawyers, but they listened to her with respect that surprised her. One of them, a woman in her 50s named Margaret, told her, "You did what we're trained to do, except you did it because you cared. That's rare." Emiliano ended both the engagement and the business partnership in the same week. The legal complaint was filed with the El Paso County District Attorney, supported by Patricia's records and the audit findings. Ramiro and the ex-fiancé were charged with fraudulent management and conspiracy. The shell supplier was shut down, its assets frozen pending investigation. None of it felt like victory. It felt like cleaning up a wound that should never have been inflicted. Emiliano spent long hours with Elena and the legal team preparing for what would come next. The case would take months, maybe years. There would be depositions, hearings, possible trials. The people who'd betrayed him would try to settle, to negotiate their way out of consequences. But Emiliano wasn't interested in settlements. They didn't just steal money, he told Elena one evening, sitting in his office with the city lights spreading out below. They tried to destroy something my father built. They hurt people who couldn't fight back. There's no deal. Emiliano visited the El Paso store one last time before the new system launched. He found Patricia restocking shelves in the dairy section, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. She was arranging milk cartons with the labels facing forward, making sure the dates were visible. Small things that mattered. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked. She looked up surprised. "Of course." They walked to the break room, now empty in the mid-morning lull. Emiliano sat across from her and folded his hands on the table. "I want to offer you a position," he said. "Coordinator for a new program we're calling Project Transparency. It'll involve training employees across the chain to recognize manipulation, creating reporting systems, and building accountability from the ground up. It's not management, it's something else. It's making sure people like you have a voice before things go wrong." Patricia blinked. I'm just a cashier. You're someone who pays attention. That's rarer than you think. She thought about Daniel, about rent, about the years she'd spent trying to hold things together with nothing but care and stubbornness. I don't know if I'm qualified. You kept a notebook for 6 months because you couldn't stand watching something wrong happen without doing anything about it. That's the only qualification that matters. Patricia accepted. The work was harder than she'd expected, not physically, but emotionally. She had to teach people to see what she'd always seen, the gaps between policy and practice, the places where numbers stopped meaning what they should. She designed simple spreadsheets, created cross-shift check-ins, and built routines that wouldn't overwhelm people who were already stretched thin. The training sessions happened after hours, in the break room or on the sales floor when the store was closed. Patricia stood in front of co-workers who'd known her as a cashier and tried to explain why documentation mattered. Some of them looked skeptical, others looked tired, a few looked angry, like she was adding work they didn't have time for. I know you're already doing too much, she'd say, her voice steady even when her hands shook. I know you clock in, do your job, and want to go home. I'm not asking you to do more work, I'm asking you to do the same work differently, to write down what you're already seeing. The hardest part was explaining why it mattered, not to the executives, but to the workers who'd learned to keep their heads down. I know you're tired, she'd say during training sessions. I know you just want to clock in, do your job, and go home. But when we stop paying attention, people like Alvaro take over, and then none of us have jobs. She told them about the scheme, not in technical terms, but in real ones. That milk you marked as damaged, someone was getting paid extra for ordering more. Those late deliveries, they were planned. Every time you signed off on something that didn't feel right, someone was using that signature to steal, not from the company, from you. Slowly the culture shifted. Employees started reporting discrepancies. Managers started listening. The shelves filled back up, and customers who drifted to competitors returned. People stopped whispering in corners and started asking questions in meetings. The fear that had kept everyone quiet began to lift. Emiliano watched from a distance, attending quarterly reviews but staying out of the daily operations. He'd learned his lesson. Trust the people who lived the work, not the people who theorized about it. One afternoon, he stopped by the El Paso store and found Patricia in the break room, reviewing a report with 2 stockers. She looked up, smiled briefly, and went back to explaining something about delivery schedules. Her voice was patient, her gestures clear. She'd grown into the role without losing what made her good at it: care. He waited until the stockers left, then approached her. How's it going? Slow, she said, but steady. People are starting to get it. Good. They stood there for a moment, the silence comfortable. Finally, Patricia said, You know, I never asked. Why were you in that parking lot that morning? Emiliano looked out the window at the lot where this had all started. I was trying to decide whether to give up or keep fighting, and then you gave me coffee and reminded me that fighting was the only option. Patricia smiled. It was just coffee. It was more than that. 6 months after the scheme was exposed, the El Paso store reported its highest customer satisfaction scores in 5 years. The neighborhood, which had feared losing its main grocery option, saw stable prices and renewed community sponsorships, youth sports leagues, school supply drives, scholarships for local students. The changes were visible. Shelves stayed full. The produce section looked fresh instead of picked over. The bakery, which had been reducing hours, extended them and hired 2 new bakers. People who'd started driving to the Walmart on the east side came back. Lines at the registers grew longer, but nobody complained because the prices were fair and the staff seemed happier. Patricia's brother, Daniel, graduated high school with honors and a scholarship to UTEP. She went to his graduation and cried quietly in the bleachers, not because she was sad, but because for the first time in years, something had worked out exactly the way it should. Daniel walked across the stage in his cap and gown, and when he received his diploma, he looked up at her and mouthed, "Thank you." She pressed her hand to her chest and nodded, unable to speak. After the ceremony, they went to Chico's Tacos, his choice, and sat in a booth with red vinyl seats that squeaked when you moved. He ordered a Coke and she ordered water, and they split an order of rolled tacos drowning in chili sauce. "You did it," he said, wiping sauce from his chin. "You actually did it." "We did it," she corrected. "You studied. I just kept the lights on." "You kept more than that on," he said. "You kept the whole store from closing. You saved people's jobs. That's not nothing." The legal case moved forward slowly. Ramiro and the ex-fiancé faced charges, and the evidence was overwhelming. Their lawyers tried to negotiate plea deals, but Emiliano refused. "They didn't just steal money," he told Elena. "They tried to destroy something my father built. They hurt people who couldn't fight back. There's no deal." The trial was scheduled for the following spring. Patricia would testify, so would Marcus, Elena, and a dozen employees who'd watched the scheme unfold without knowing what they were seeing. Emiliano didn't look forward to it, but he didn't dread it either. Justice wasn't about satisfaction. It was about accountability. One evening, he stopped by the El Paso store after closing. Patricia was finishing paperwork in the office, her desk lamp the only light in the building. The store was quiet except for the hum of refrigeration units and the distant sound of a vacuum cleaner on the far side of the sales floor. "You're here late," he said from the doorway. She looked up. "So are you." He smiled. "I wanted to see how things were going. Really going, not the numbers, the people." Patricia leaned back in her chair. "The people are tired, but they're not scared anymore. That's something." "It's everything." A year after the parking lot, Emiliano and Patricia met for coffee at a diner near the store. It wasn't planned. They just kept running into each other, and eventually it became easier to schedule it than to pretend it was coincidence. The diner was called Maria's, a local place that had been there for 40 years. The booths were cracked vinyl, the menus were laminated and sticky, and the coffee was strong enough to wake the dead. Patricia liked it because it reminded her of the places her mother used to take her. Unpretentious, honest, real. Emiliano liked it because nobody recognized him there. "Do you ever think about that morning?" Emiliano asked, stirring sugar into his cup. Patricia looked out the window at the street. "Sometimes. I think about how close everything came to falling apart. Not just the store, everything, your life, mine. You saved it. I just paid attention. That's what saved it." They sat quietly for a moment, the diner humming around them with the sounds of plates and conversation. A waitress refilled their cups without asking, the way good waitresses do. Outside, El Paso stretched toward the desert, a city built on borderlands and resilience. The Franklin Mountains rose in the distance, purple in the late afternoon light. "I don't know what I'm supposed to learn from all this," Patricia said finally. "That paying attention matters, that one person can make a difference. It feels too simple." Emiliano shook his head. "It's not simple. It's just true. You saw something wrong and didn't look away. Most people look away." "Maybe, but I didn't do it alone. You believed me. Marcus helped. Elena fought. It wasn't just me. But it started with you." Patricia smiled, small and tired and real. "I guess it started with coffee." "Yeah, it did." She picked up her cup, held it between both hands the way people do when they want warmth more than caffeine. "Do you still think about giving up, like you were that morning?" Emiliano considered the question. "Sometimes, but less than I used to. I think that morning taught me something." "What?" "That the hardest moments are also the clearest ones. When everything's stripped away, you find out what actually matters." They finished their drinks and walked back toward the parking lot where everything had begun. The asphalt was warm under the afternoon sun, the white lines still marking out spaces for cars that would come and go, carrying people who'd never know what had almost been lost. Emiliano looked at the spot where he'd sat in his car, shoulders shaking, the world closing in. It felt distant now, not because it hadn't mattered, but because it had led somewhere worth going. "Thank you," he said, "for the coffee, for everything after. Patricia nodded. Thank you for listening. They parted ways, each heading back to their own lives, but the coffee remained between them, a small, ordinary gesture that had become the foundation for something larger. Not a miracle, not a fairy tale, just proof that care, repeated and deliberate, could hold the center when everything else wanted to fall apart. The El Paso store stayed open, the people kept working, and every morning someone arrived 15 minutes early to make sure the day started right. Because that's what it meant to build something that lasted: attention, care, and the willingness to offer coffee to a stranger who needed it. In the end, the story wasn't about corporate fraud or legal victories. It was about the moment when one person decided that another person's pain mattered more than convenience. Everything else followed from that. And in a world where it was easier to look away, that decision to see, to care, to act, made all the difference.